So in my last video, I made the argument that Refrogger should copy the sight misalignment feature from Squad, which is like on this weapon here. And a lot of guys made really insightful comments on how it works in real life, on how cheek weld works with the weapon and all of that. Well, with all those things considered, I still think it's the best solution to overcome the problem of limited input possibilities in an FPS game and to simulate the weight of the weapon. Okay, so here I'm going to show you how it works in Squad. Now, Squad has an interesting problem here. There's three ways Squad simulates it. So you have this one. This is where the front sight leads the character view model and the camera. You see here, so move your camera, your front sight overshoots the camera direction, while the rear end of the gun lags behind it. Okay, that's what I like because it makes you really feel the weight of the weapon. However, now if you switch to a different weapon, here that's an M4. Now if I switch to an M16A4, which is a similar weapon but a bit longer, I'd have to pick one without iron sights. Okay, now I'm holding at that. Notice what's happening here. Now the front sight doesn't lead, but the whole weapon model leads the camera in front. Which by lead I mean make quick turns. Notice the view, the model of the weapon overshoots where the camera wants to go, so it's there before the camera. Now that might be closer to realistic cheek weld. However, you lose the sense of you lose the sensation of the weapon having weight. It's a bit hard to see when you're not playing it yourself. It feels like it's flopping around without any weight. Okay, now I'm here in Blender modeling program, and I created a really primitive model of a weapon, so I can show you the side picture. Now, what's a side picture in real life? Because the first thing is that the rear sight and the front sight of a gun, they are fixed to the weapon, so they're always in the same distance and orientation to each other. Now, the side picture is in real life is the eye you're aiming with lining up with that invisible line between those two, so you get a side picture, and then you know you're on target at a specific range. Okay, so it's like that. The camera a bit. You can see here, the camera moves, and you get a side picture. Now, a lot of you made a comment that in real life you have cheek weld, which means your face or your cheek is pressing against the stock of the weapon, and then you have a stable position. So basically, your eye is in a fixed configuration with the front and rear post. Now that's true and that's realistic. However, it assumes that the player is only in two states, or the shooter in real life is in two states, in a perfect cheek weld or completely not in any type of side picture. And I think that's a problem here. Okay, so now the assumption here is that now on this graph, the top is being in a cheek weld, and the bottom of the graph is completely not being in any type of side picture. And I think a lot of people who make the cheek weld argument, they assume that the shooter is either in that state or completely in the state without any side picture. And then he goes back up to the other state, depending on whether he wants to aim or not. And that's currently how it is in Refrogger. In Refrogger, if you start aiming, you're in a perfect cheek weld, and the side picture doesn't. There's tiny millimeters of only tiny amounts of side picture misalignment, and that is realistic as long as you would assume that the shooter is an absolute terminator who focuses his entire focus on just being in cheek weld. But I think in a realistic shooting situation, take another color, would probably be like that. If you're expecting to shoot your weapon the next minute or next 20 seconds, you probably wobble around in being almost in a cheek weld all the time. Let's assume you're expecting to shoot your weapon in 20 seconds, but okay, so you're in a perfect side picture like that. And let's say you want to quickly glance over at something over there, and you don't need to have a perfect side picture, because probably the shooting that you're going to do is going to be at a range close enough where focusing on an extreme side picture is probably not even required, or might even get in the way, I think. So let's say then you lower your weapon like that. Let's assume that's your approximate camera view direction, and you point your gun slightly down, and the rear sight is up there. And that's something that Squad stimulates with that side wobble by letting the tip of the gun lead the entire model around like that. So you're looking like that. Maybe you're glancing over there. You're lowering your gun a bit more, and then you go Then you go back to the side picture. And here's the second problem. See, I think in squad, if you're not aiming a weapon down your sights, then something interesting happens. Notice here what happens. That's the full-sized M16. Notice. See what happens here. The weapon model, if you're rotating unsighted, it leads the camera. Notice it's there before the camera is there. That completely destroys any sense of having weight on the weapon. And that's something the Escape from Tarkov actually gets right. In Escape from Tarkov, even in unaimed mode, the weapon always sways behind the camera because that's what simulates the feeling of weight for the weapon. And that's, as far as I can think, that's the only way to simulate the mass of a weapon. Because the problem is, gaming input is limited. You only have a mouse normally, unless you use tracker. But I think tracker is not so good for FPS games because it feels like you are sitting in a grocery cart rolling downhill because you can't tell what your body's doing. And so notice they're making this mistake, I think, by accident. Notice how the gun feels like it has no weight. Because the problem is, you could technically limit the rotation speed depending on the weapon you're carrying. But then you run into the problem of, why should my character have to turn as slow as the weapon is heavy? Because in real life, you can probably turn and glance over to one side while your weapon is still not raised in that direction. And physics dictates that your weapon will always lag behind where you're looking at. Or at least I think that's how it should be. Because I think nobody would, let's say you want to aim 30 degrees to the left, and you raise your gun to the 30 degrees, and then you put yourself in a side picture. You probably glance over there and then raise the gun. So it's almost at the same time. And to make it even more interesting, Squad actually avoids that problem of the gun feeling weightless. If you pick out a heavy weapon, let's say you take, where's a heavy one? Yeah, that's a heavy one, M240. If you, let's take a shot. Let's aim the gun around. I can see it's actually lagging behind and overshooting after it's rotating. See that? It's actually slower. And you can notice it when you're aiming downside. See that? That's how you really can feel the weight of the weapon. So I think that out of all the three ways I just presented, is that that's the full size. So that's the full size. I think that's the bad one. That keeps more cheek weld, but it makes the gun feel weightless. I think the best one is they're using, and I think they're doing it differently by accident on different guns. I think that's the best way because it's the best way to simulate your gun pointing somewhere else than where you're looking. And in real life, you probably spend a lot of time like glancing, raising your gun, shooting. The problem is in Squad, you can't actually free look while you're aiming down the sight. And it really makes you feel the plasticity of the weapon, and it feels like a more elegant version of free aim. If you know previous Arma games, or Red Orchestra 2, you would have free aim. You could aim like that, and the weapon would basically point where your mouse would go within like an invisible box that's different from where your camera is looking. So if you go to the edge of the invisible box, your camera would move, but your weapon would be like this independent thing in between. And that had the problem that it would make the weapon also feel weightless, because you cannot limit the mouse rotation speed based on the weapon, because then you're limiting the view speed too. So that's why I make this video, because I think people made some good arguments about a cheek weld, but I think in real life, on any type of shooting situation, you would spend more time being in somewhere in that twilight between almost cheek weld and slightly glancing over your sight. Okay, here's a small clip from a pretty amazing war movie. It's called Mosul. I think it's on Netflix, because I think it has really well choreographed combat scenes. And I'd like to show you two small 2-second situations of the guy who's going to step out on the left and shoot between the door and the car. It's this guy. Now, pay attention to what happens to when he's weapon. He's sticking it through the door and he's shooting it. And what he's probably would be, okay, that's a staged movie scene, it's not real life, but he's looking in that direction and he's aligning the gun sort of to shoot in that direction. As he's shooting it, the recoil happens. It misaligns probably in all three axes. And if he slightly shifts his aim around on some point, it would probably do the same thing like in Squad, where the front sight appears to be leading the rear of the weapon from the perspective of the shooter. Another shot scene of that. See also here, this guy doesn't have any real sight picture. He's just pointing it in the approximate direction. There's one more point with the shooter on the door. Let me find it. That should be here. See, it's the same thing. I'm just going to slow down the speed of the video. Turn off the audio. You see here, from his perspective, the camera is stable, but the weapon is going to wobble around slightly as he's shifting his aim around by small amounts. And from his view, it's the side picture misaligning in a way where the front side appears to be leading the rear side. See that? The last shot went bang, and the rear side went down, but the shooter's camera is still the same angle. Wait, I'm going to go back with the camera. But pay attention to what happens here, what happens to the back of the gun in relation to the shooter's face. See, gun goes bang, it presses down, but the camera angle, if this was a video game, would still be mostly stable in that direction. So what would happen from his view is that from the kick, the front side raises up, and the rear side of the weapon gets pushed down like that. And from the shooter's perspective, it's basically the same as in squad, which would be something like that. See, it's hard to demonstrate because the actual shooting animation is really bad in squad because the gun just flops up. But notice here, when you raise the mouse fast, you see how and that's what would happen from the perspective of the shooter. So that's it for this video, and I think people made really good arguments for the cheek weld, but I think there are a lot of things in between a perfect cheek weld and not aiming through the sights at all. And I think squad currently does it best in terms of how to portray it in a video game.